she was doing as she describes and discusses what's been going on with her husband. The way we do that matters. And that hope and that purpose will matter indeed. And nothing can defeat that purpose that God has for us in our lives. So, yes, David?
You were talking about heaven, no pain and so forth. Well, but that's where we had a rebellion. That's where the devil and his followers.
Right.
So
then
it looks like it's not just smooth.
Yeah, he's asking about the whole idea of, well, if that was the case, then in heaven, and when they were in the presence of God, there was a rebellion. So that one asked the question whether that was then such a smooth thing. And I don't want to go into that. That'll be a big topic. I'll just do a very, very brief word on that. And I say there that this was with the angelic hosts, first of all, that there was, like with the Adamic fall prior to that, there was in fact a testing. It was a holiness but unconfirmed. It was not tested. And this test then is needful in order to see if this is volitional or if this is just something that you're scraping and bowing because you have no choice. God's not interested in robots, but He's interested in people who would love Him and serve Him out of love. And so the angelic rebellion illustrates the awful gift of freedom, the awful gift of choice. And my view there, and the same is true with the Adamic gift. I want you to state that Adam didn't have the full vision of God. He walked with Him in the garden and so forth, but I don't think he had the unmediated vision of the glory of God, or he could never have even dreamed of what he did. And so I think that's possibly true with the angels as well. Otherwise, they could never even have dreamed of that. I think, though, once having made their choice, the elect angels then were able to see fully what because then that's consistent with the willful response that they made with a lack of the fullness. My claim then is that we will see Him in His fullness. And then you couldn't even imagine turning from Him, because you will know fully He is the wellspring, the fountainhead of all your joy and all beauty and all truth. All comes from Him. So then in that unmediated thing. But you see, if He did that in full force, who could resist? This is the thing. So that I believe then that He gives us this dignity of choice because love requires a choice. You can't force love. Therefore, I believe He gave us that choice. And then, once having made the choice, He can then confirm that in the fullness of that heavenly vision. Therefore, I don't believe that there will be another fall. I don't think that'll be... it's because I think that was a once-for-all deal with angels and then with men. There another question? I thought I saw another here. Okay. Let me move on. I want to speak about how adversity creates something very important for us. It creates an awareness of our need that we otherwise probably wouldn't come as deeply in contact with. And though this is a difficult thing, nevertheless, I think this is redemptive. I think it is a good thing to come into contact with your need. Tim Hansel, in a book that he wrote years ago, wrote that one of the greatest tragedies of our modern civilization is that you and I can live a trivial life and get away with it. You see, one of the great advantages of pain and suffering is that it forces us to break through our superficial crust to discover life on a deeper and more meaningful level. What he's saying then is actually it forces you, against your will, to begin to go below the surface and to begin to wrestle with things in a more deep and profound way than you otherwise would have done. And I think that there's a lot of insight in that. I mean, it's C.S. Lewis. I have a few quotes from Lewis here from his problem of pain that I find very helpful. Everyone has noticed how hard it is to turn our thoughts to God when everything is going well with us. Have you noticed that, by the way? You know, you put in a perfunctory word of gratitude, but you're not really clinging to Him in any profoundly meaningful way. You're thankful, but you're not really aware of your true sense of needs. Things are going your way. We, quote, have all we want, unquote, is this terrible saying when all does not include God. We find God an interruption. We regard him as a paratrooper regards his parachute. It's there for emergencies, but he hopes he'll never have to use it. You see, that's the idea. So you only cry out, has it come to this that I have to pray about it? You know, it's like this desperate notion that prayer is like a last-ditch effort here. Has it come to this? And that's exactly what the guys in the boat did, remember? When the boat was filling up with water? They saw prayer as the last ditch. Only when they were at the end of their own skill. Because remember, they were fishermen, so they figured they could handle this one. Only when God allowed them to come to the end of their own physical resources and skills did they then come to the awareness that this is beyond us. We are at the end of our tether. Only then do they wake up Jesus. Very significant that he's asleep during this storm. They wake him up and they say, "Don't you care that we're perishing?" And he does something. I don't know, I often wonder when I think about that, what did they have in mind for him to do? Because what he did is not what they had in mind. When he got up and spoke to the wind and the waves and rebuked them and said, "Hush, be still," and immediately they were still. That just doesn't happen. And then what did they say? Remember? What was their response? They learned something about him, and they asked the question, "What manner of man is this who's in this boat with us, that even the wind and the waves would respond to him in this way?" You see, that's why I like to think of it. There are several accounts on the Sea of Galilee in the boat, and in every account, Jesus teaches something about himself to the disciples that they didn't fully realize before. That's why I call that boat Jesus' floating seminary. Basically, it was his way of teaching the disciples. So what they had in mind for him to do, I'm not quite sure, but he did something beyond what they expected. But you see, it's almost as though that turning to Jesus was the last effort. It was the last thing, come to the point of desperation. And I think that this is really a mistake, that if we're not involving God in all that we do and think, we're making a mistake. Lewis goes on to write, "While what we call our own life remains agreeable, we will not surrender it to him. What then can God do in our interests but to make our own life less agreeable to us? To take away the plausible sources of false happiness." Did you catch that? Plausible. They seem to be, but they're not really sources, but they're false happiness. It's not the real happiness that he wants us to have. You see, my view here goes back to our teaching in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 7, 7-8, when he said that that the one who asks and seeks and knocks, that if we ask, it will be given to us. If we seek, we will find. If you knock, it'll be open to you. And I think that adversity reveals our need and drives us to ask, seek, and knock. And that can be a very healthy thing indeed. So I've come to the conclusion that we cannot grow apart from our awareness of our need. And we're all desperate men, but we don't know it. And so often God will put you in a condition where you begin to realize that and take away those things. And that can be a very severe mercy, but a real grace. And I think that's very important for us to see in that way. So it goes back to what C.S. Lewis wrote in that same book. God whispers to us in our pleasures. He speaks to us in our conscience, but shouts to us in our pain. Pain is God's megaphone to rouse a deaf world. So if he can't get you in your place, the smart thing then, let's be logical, the smart thing would be to listen to him whisper in your pleasures, wouldn't it? What would that be like then? If he whispered to you in your pleasures, and he does, if you responded to that, what you'd be doing then would be incredibly grateful for the small, tender mercies throughout your life. Again, I've often mentioned that movie as a movie to see, Robert Duvall. See it again. Tender Mercies. If you haven't seen it, see it. If you have seen it again, because I want you to notice the understated motif of the sovereign